Hello and welcome to the How Not to Screw Up Your Kids podcast, the bucket emptying episodes. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Han, psychologist and parenting expert. So, pour yourself a cuppa, find a comfy seat, and enjoy the conversation. Today's episode is a listener question, and the question is, how do we help and support our children when they encounter content on their smartphones which they find upsetting? Now, I want to just sort of frame this in a way that will be helpful for everybody that's listening. And I just want you to consider that content may well be something that has been searched, something that has appeared on some social platform, or it may be within communication that they have, either with their immediate peers, friends that they have, or maybe something that might be unsolicited. So that's what we're really looking at, and how can we help and support our children and our teens on that basis. And I think I would share sort of two things that we can do. One is around how our children and our teens curate what's on their phone, and also how they're then able to reflect and get some perspective on what is curated on their phone. So let's start with the curation piece. And I want you to imagine for a moment that the mobile device that your child has, whatever that device is like a book. And that book is filled with words and content and stories. And it's also filled with images, pictures, and things that are visually appealing. When we talk to our children and our teens about curation, it's a really lovely analogy to give them, because what we're then explaining to them is that mobile phone that they have, that smartphone that they have, allows them to choose what appears in their book, what they might be interested in reading about, what sparks curiosity, what maybe gives them some top tips around things or boosts their confidence, and also visual imagery, which uplifts their mood or gives them some ideas, or generally, again, boosts their confidence. So when we talk about curation, we're simply talking about what are the things do we want to be looking at as and when we open that book. And we could open that book at any page. We don't necessarily open the book from the start and go through to the finish. We open it randomly in different places. So one of the things that I believe that we ought to be having conversations with our children and our teens about regularly is, how are they curating that book, and how regularly are they reviewing the content in terms of the written form and what they read about, and also what they see visually, and how often are they doing that to ensure that they're still getting things in that book which they want to read about, which is inspiring or funny or thought-provoking or teaches them things, or imagery that sparks joy, curiosity, and other things. So my suggestion would be for our children, really encouraging our children and teens to be curating their feed on a regular basis, maybe weekly, maybe every other week. And so that just becomes something that is a regular habit, so that they can understand that actually they have the power, they're empowered to choose what shows up in that book that they randomly open up at any period of time. And it's about helping them understand that what they curate is going to show up in that book, whether they're feeling stressed, whether they're feeling excited, whether they're feeling nervous, whether they're feeling sad, whatever the feeling might be. It's encouraging them to think about that content and that imagery in that book, regardless of how they're feeling. It wouldn't upset them if they saw it at any time. Now, obviously, if your child has stumbled across some content, and usually I find what typically tends to happen is their feed may well be curated in a particular way where they begin to feel left out. Maybe they feel that their life is not quite as exciting or as fun, because what they're seeing within their feed are peers and friends who might be going out and doing things or getting together, and they're not included. So those are often the things that they will find upsetting, because they feel that they're. So for me, it's being able to help them see the perspective side too. So there's the curation side, which is helping them see that analogy, that they get to choose what shows up in that book when they open it randomly. The other aspect is about perspective. And there's a couple of sort of subtle nuances within that. The first is about helping our children and teens find ways to gain some perspective and some distance from what they're seeing. It's about agreeing specific times where our children are not on devices. Perspective allows us to see that this is a snapshot in time, that people don't live their lives like that regularly, that people don't typically post things or put things up that show them being unhappy and miserable, and that isn't typically how they live their lives. When we are in, as my daughter calls it, and I think everyone does, is this idea when we're in doom scrolling, what we fail to do is to be able to look back at things from that perspective. Perspective is like having that bird's eye view and being able to see, actually, amongst all of the other things, this is just a snapshot. When we're caught in doom scrolling, or our children are caught in doom scrolling, what we're seeing is like feeds and rolls and rolls and rolls and reams and images of people living these happy lives. For us as parents, it's people looking like they've got their act together, they're all playing happy families, there's no tension. Now we know when we get perspective, when we're able to take that bird's eye view, that isn't the reality of how things actually are day to day. But when you're caught in that doom scrolling or constantly on that phone in terms of messaging friends in big WhatsApp groups, you don't necessarily get that. So one thing around the perspective is around agreeing with your child or teen specific periods of time during the day where they are not on devices, because that allows that break and that clarity of thinking and that clarity of mind and that distance from the content that helps them then put a bit more perspective on it. So that's one aspect of what that perspective is simply being able to take a break so they can have that bird's eye view. The other aspect is about knowing what their personal triggers are. So we all have our own vulnerabilities around how we feel about ourselves, how we value ourselves, the belief systems that we have around ourselves. So it's having conversations with our children and teens about the areas that are their vulnerabilities, the areas that are their trigger points. Is it that they have a belief, either real or not real, that they are less popular? Maybe they have a belief that they are less interesting, they are less fun, they're excluded. Whatever those beliefs are and whatever those triggers are, it's really important that we have those conversations head on, that we don't scoot around them with this belief that if we don't have those conversations with our children, if we have those conversations with our children, what happens is we create a problem that maybe wasn't there or was just simmering, and now we've made it real and huge. Actually, it does the exact opposite. By having it out in the open, by having honest discussions around maybe what triggers you as a parent, what are you likely to get triggered by, either through messages from friends or other parents, or triggers you when you're scrolling through your social. It helps you understand those aspects, and then we can then equip our children and our teens with the internal narrative that happens when we're triggered is all of the inner critic. I can't, I'm not good as, people view me this, I'm excluded, I'm not as fun, people don't like me. Whatever that, I'm not perfect, I don't get things right. Understanding that triggering narrative then allows us, in the moments that we're not with it, to be able to equip ourselves with an alternative voice, the voice of our cheerleader, the voice of our best self, that isn't a sort of like unhinged from reality, you're so amazing, you can do anything, but much more a pragmatic, when you see that it makes you feel, that this is not real, it's only a snapshot, you have friends, these are your group, you're loved, you're funny. It's that, and then pointing through to the evidence. So understanding the chatter and the triggering chatter also then helps to equip our children with what they might need in terms of their mantras and their support at those times, so that they're also adding to this perspective. So we've got the curation of we get to choose what shows up in our book, and we actively need to find ways to have time that's digitally off devices so that we are able to get that bird's eye view and that distance. But equally, we're also aware of the things that trigger us, what the narrative that comes from that, and that we've created some alternative dialogue, whether that's mantras, whether that's affirmations, whether that's soothing statements that we make to ourselves in the heat of those moments that allow us to get that perspective. Now, I hope that that helps answer that particular question, because I think it's a really excellent and important question, and one that comes up a lot with our children and teens, and is a really helpful piece of sort of communication that we can have with them to help them navigate those particular challenges. So I hope you find the episode helpful. As ever, if you have enjoyed this episode, I would be eternally grateful if you could rate, follow, and review this podcast so that others can find us and we can spread the love. So until next time.